often said that the 20th century began not in 1900, but in 1914 with the outbreak of World War I. This raises an interesting question. Has the 21st century begun yet? I believe that it has, but I also believe that it's hard to pin down the exact date. To do so, you need a storyline, a story of the future. Now, if you want to tell a dystopian story, choosing a date is easy. Just use September 11th, 2001. But if you want to tell a hopeful, helpful story, one in which we actually get our arms around our biggest problems, one in which the historians of the future are able to look back to us today and see a time of new beginnings, what date exactly would you use to date those new beginnings? I'm going to suggest two possible dates corresponding to two very different storylines which will unfold together. The first date comes relatively soon, this December, at the climate conference in Paris. Now, there's a lot to say about Paris, but I'm just going to follow established climate, big think, punditry traditions, and quote Winston Churchill. If we're lucky, Paris will mark the end of the beginning of the climate mobilization, the point at which all countries table very ambitious emission reduction pledges that they're willing to defend as being both ambitious and fair. It won't be enough, but if you think about it, it might be a pretty good place from which to finally begin serious global climate negotiations. The second date marks a very different kind of event, one that has already taken place. It occurred in February of 2011 when a computer system named Watson defeated the reigning human champions in the unstructured language game of Jeopardy. Now, I'm fully aware of the fact that this is somewhat of an arbitrary marker, particularly when compared to something like the Paris climate negotiations, but it's about the best marker we're ever going to find for the deep challenges of the climate, of the computer revolution. So let's start with the climate crisis. In fact, let's start with climate science, which is marching on and which is marching into some very dark territories. I will cite exactly one paper. Its lead author is Jim Hansen, and it suggests that the old interpretation of the science in which we'd basically be okay if we could hold the surface warming to 2 degrees centigrade might just be a wee bit optimistic. It suggests, in fact, that 2 degrees centigrade should not be seen as anything like a guardrail which is placed to keep us on a relatively safe emissions pathway, but it should rather be seen as a last-ditch line of defense that must not at any cost be breached. Consider the warming oceans of the warming waters of the Pacific. If Hansen is correct, those waters are going to rise by about 2 meters this century, and causing immense suffering and dislocation. So much dislocation that, in Hansen's words, conflicts arising from forced migrations and economic collapse might make the planet ungovernable, threatening the fabric of civilization. Now, I want to be very clear that this is not speculation. It's not even a worst-case scenario. This is solid science. The science is telling us to be very, very careful. Moreover, we already know it. We are not fools. We know these things even though we don't like to talk about them. As Leonard Cohen said, everybody knows. What everybody does not know is what we're going to have to do about them. which essentially comes down to managing the inevitable. And the inevitable, if we actually intend to stabilize the climate system, basically means a global emissions pathway in which we draw greenhouse gas emissions to near zero as quickly as humanly possible. Now, near zero, globally, 50 years, more or less. Wouldn't this be impossible? No, it would not. Which brings me to the second part of my story, which is technological revolution. Now, even though I began with Watson, I'm not going to start talking about technological revolution by talking about computers. I'm going to jump ahead to new energy, to solar energy and wind energy and next generation batteries and smart grids and all the rest of it, all of which is coming along nicely. There's a really fine example of just how fast the renewables revolution is unfolding. That's Swanson's law, which measures the falling costs of solar panels. And it actually may, in the end, this is a log scale, by the way, it may in the end be even more important than Moore's law. In fact, solar PV is becoming so cheap that it's already less expensive to build out large-scale solar generating capacity than it is to build new coal, which I cite as evidence for the fact that this technology revolution we need is coming along very nicely. But there's a wrinkle. And the wrinkle is that even though the story of the 21st century is going to have everything to do with technology, it is not fundamentally a story about technology. It's a story about the political transition in which we empower ourselves to use technology effectively. It's about maximizing the catalytic power of technology. It's about stop waiting for technology to save us and admit that even though we already have the technological capabilities and are building out the technological capabilities that we need to save ourselves, we still have to do so. There's a wrinkle in this story, okay? There's a wrinkle in the story of technological revolution. And that's that it's always been shadowed by the fear of technology. And the nightmare of technology, you all know it. Everybody here knows it, right? Frankenstein, nuclear war, 1984's all-seeing video cams, killer robots, implacable machines in general, ultimately human obsolescence. But the thing is that the old nightmare story of technology was forgotten during the personal computer revolution. It's a very interesting story, which told an entirely different tale. The tale of cheap, complex devices, floods of money, boundless optimism, technological reductionism, ultimately technological cool. This all crystallized during the early Wired years when technological optimism and technological cool became the thing. And my claim is that this is, if not past its prime. And the reason is that the worry has returned. The old shadow has returned. It's thick in the air, and it's not going away. And the reason why this is complicated, this is partially because of the environmental crisis, but it's also partially because of automation. And in particular, the new automation, the sudden emergence of what is being called the second machine age has given new salience to this sphere. New York Times writer John Markoff, in his new book, Machines of Loving Grace, tells the story of computerization in a very interesting and relevant way. He tells it as a debate between the friends of artificial intelligence who dream of the friends of AI who dream of artificial intelligence, and the friends of IA who dream of intelligence augmentation, or the use of technology to amplify human capabilities. And Markoff's point, and the reason I cite his book, is that it's a choice. There's more than one possible high-tech future that we get to choose, and that we had better choose well. The talk I'm giving is constructed of two storylines. They're interacting and they're evolving together, and we have no way of knowing how the story is going to end. But what we had better do is maintain a sense of perspective, because, look, machines are not becoming intelligent, but they're absolutely becoming more capable. And the century ahead is absolutely one in which the mechanical systemization of complex economic processes is going to exceed all bounds. Think about Amazon-style high automation distribution centers. And think about the automated factories that are just now coming online. Think about the automation of writing. Think about the automation of legal research and the automation of analytics in general. Think about the automation of think work. Put it all together and add integrated global supply chains and unregulated international trading regimes, and add the new class system, now rapidly codifying into a new caste system. Put it in the context of a planet drifting into climate crisis, and you'll get the picture that I'm trying to paint. How will it all unfold? Obviously, I do not know. What I do know is that the benefits of technological revolution are being very unevenly distributed. The new automation suggests a future in which jobs no longer allocate access to human life and human dignity in anything like an acceptable way. Fair access to education, to housing, to culture, to social stability, to hope. This is a fading dream. And now add the energy and climate problems, challenges to this mix, and where you get large-scale distributional conflicts at every level. I'll give you three examples. One, think to the trillions of dollars in unburnable coal and oil and gas that absolutely must be kept in the ground unless we intend to deglaciate the entire planet. Think of the scale of the challenge here. Keeping all this unburnable carbon in the ground is going to cause immense economic dislocation. There are going to be big winners and there are going to be big losers. Think about the Paris climate talks, which can only succeed if they lay down a fair shares pathway by which the wealthy countries and the poor ones are able to cooperate to rapidly phase out fossil energy and phase in renewables. This is anything but a simple technology problem, which is why, in the end, the climate treaty may wind up being the largest economic treaty of all time. Think about the export-driven, manufacturing-led development paths by which low-skilled countries like China were able to lift themselves out of poverty in the first place. And think about all the strivers like India and Vietnam and dozens of other countries that would like to follow in their footsteps. And think about what it would mean if the new automation technologies close off those development pathways. The climate movement, the dream of the climate movement, is one in which clean energy technology combines with equitable access to yield sustainable prosperity for all. But how, given the challenges of the 21st century, what has to happen in order to make this dream believable? So let me tell you why I'm guardedly hopeful. I'm guardedly hopeful because the shape of the reckoning has become widely visible. Naomi Klein, in her new book, argues that the climate crisis presents us with new ways of thinking big, and that in fact it requires us to think big. My point, a closely related one, is that the climate crisis, properly considered, is a problem that is not big enough to solve. This is my key point. The reference is to Dwight Eisenhower, who said, "Whenever I run into a problem I can't solve, I always make it bigger." In my opinion, this is a bit of wisdom that should be a lot more familiar to us, because in a time of big history, thinking small is an invitation for disaster. This is why I've tried to bring the story of the second machine age into the story of the climate century. Because automation brings big history into people's lives in a way that makes it understandable. Work is personal. Unemployment is personal. Underemployment is personal. Mega storms and droughts, I would like to believe, are personal, and all of them are opportunities to open up thought about the larger context, the larger storyline. Sometime in 2016, an amazing thing is going to happen. For the first time in modern history, the richest 1% of the global population will own as much as the other 99%. Why do I bring this up? Because as anthropologist Jared Diamond argued in his classic 2005 book, Collapse, societies in which the decision-making elites are able to retreat behind protective barricades and close themselves off to the sufferings of the larger populations are exactly the societies that do not adapt to pressing circumstances, exactly the societies that choose to fail. Now, the climate crisis, properly considered, is big enough to solve. To see this, think first of all to the Pope, who told us that economic inequality and climate catastrophe are two sides of one point. And to see what can be done about it, think to the fact that the best ways forward are the ways that allow us to address both of the problems at the same time, ways that allow us to depolarize the economic divide at the same time that we lay down the transitional pathway to a new climate world. There are thousands of good ideas for how to move forward. We have no shortage of good ideas. Green jobs, a green infrastructure, cap and dividend, a guaranteed basic income, social and environmental regulation at every level of the economy, a high-tech future that works for everybody, a global climate treaty that's designed to lift up the poor. The point is that there are lots of ideas, but we have to think big, and we have to do it now, because no matter what else happens or doesn't happen, unless we shift trillions of dollars a year from fossils to renewables, we haven't got a chance of stabilizing, and fast, we haven't got a chance of stabilizing the climate system. And it isn't going to happen by itself. So to close, I just want to say that we can do this. We have the tools. One of these days, we're going to recognize the scale of the challenge and take it from there. And that will really be a day to remember.